All right, let's start talking about part 2 of emotional intelligence. It's important to understand that although some people say that your heart is involved with emotional intelligence while your brain is more involved with mental, you can't really make that kind of separation. What's important to understand is emotional intelligence is not one or the other. Emotional intelligence is a combination of heart intelligence, brain intelligence, and so on and so forth. Working everything together. Take a look at this figure. What do you see first? So how many saw the fox first? Okay, up here in the corner. All right, what do you see second? The rabbit. Did everybody see the rabbit second? What did you see second? All right. Did you see what looks like what would it be, a tiger or something like that? And the rabbit is in its mouth. What I like about these kinds of puzzles, which actually are anti-aging, they're good for your brain, to me it exemplifies the beauty of emotional intelligence, because what you see first is not everything. There are other things to see, but it takes a few seconds for you to realize that, yes, there's a fox. Oh, but look, the branches make the shape of a tiger or some kind of cat, and then here's the little rabbit. I hope that he's just having fun in there, actually. And so that's a little bit like emotional intelligence. What you see first is not necessarily the whole picture. And emotional intelligence gives you the ability to take a step back, count to 5, count to 10, and see what else you see. That's a good metaphor for me. So my working definition of emotional intelligence is this. Read with me. Emotional intelligence involves the ability to know what feels good, what feels bad, and how to get from bad to good in a way that results in positive outcomes. The brain wants to feel good. There's nothing wrong with that. Remember, joy, that's where we want to spend most of our time, which means we feel good. Doesn't mean we have a flawless life. There are ups and downs, but we know we can deal with things, and basically we feel good. We do know when we feel bad, so that we can look at that and take appropriate steps to resolve whatever we can so we move back up to feeling better. People who don't understand that try to feel euphoric all the time, and as we mentioned, they have to get involved in an addictive behavior in order to do that. That's not emotional intelligence. When Daniel Goleman first put out a book on emotional intelligence, probably mid-90s, a lot of people had never even heard of the term, didn't know what it meant, had no idea that you could take a metaphorical continuum and plot where behaviors are on that continuum based on the outcomes they give you. Positive outcomes, high EQ. Low, negative outcomes, low EQ. And the higher your position on this metaphorical continuum, the quicker it is for you to recognize dysfunctional behaviors and do something about them, not just tolerate them. I remember that at one point in my life, before I had my wonderful titanium hips and found it difficult to stick shift, I always drove cars with 4 on the floor. And my favorite was 240Zs. Do you remember those? I had a bright psychedelic green 240Z, and I thought I was the bee's knees. I had gone down and to order the car and picked this nice bright color and thought, boy, I'm going to have a car nobody's got this car in Napa Valley. Went to pick the car up, drove home, went clear down to sadness. I passed 11 cars, the same color as my new 240Z. I had never noticed them before. Now I went right back up to joy, but so it's very much like that with emotional intelligence. The higher your levels, the more skills you have honed, the quicker you are to pick up dysfunctional behaviors, protect yourself from them, make different choices, deal with them appropriately. This is what's called the success quotient. How successful you are in life over time is a combination of whatever your IQ is plus whatever your EQ is, and that gives you your success quotient. So IQ is something, the potential for our IQ is something that we inherit. And recently there's some suggestion that you probably get your IQ from your opposite gender parent. That's not one of the things that you get a little bit from your mom and a little bit from your dad. So I would get my father's IQ, my brother would get my mother's IQ. But remember that IQ is not just a static ceiling. If you want to work on your IQ, studies have shown it's possible to raise it from between 5 and 30 points, depending where you start. But eventually you'll probably reach a plateau. And most people have all the IQ they need to be as successful as they need. Emotional intelligence quotient, or EQ, it describes learned abilities. You don't inherit them. But as I mentioned in the first section, if you had parents, caregivers, and teachers with high levels of EQ, you at least saw that role modeled. So you at least had the opportunity to learn those skills if you wanted to. So it's not inherited, it's learned, but it's very complementary to academic intelligence as defined by IQ. And so that's why we say EQ is really a combination. However, they don't contribute equally. IQ contributes about 20% to your success quotient. And sometimes people get really fixated on IQ. It's only 20%. It's 20%, but it's only 20%. EQ contributes about 80%, and the research in America and India show that top performers in life use both of them in harmony. But you know that one is going to be more contributory to your success than the other. This is what studies have shown. At work, successful managers tend to have high emotional intelligence. Less successful managers often have a very high IQ, but a low EQ. So one of the things that's interesting to look at is, where do your behaviors fall on that metaphorical continuum? Are you getting pretty positive outcomes from your behaviors? If you aren't, you might want to look at your EQ and start raising those. So read with me. EQ does not show up in IQ tests, of course. And yet your level matters more than anything else in determining your overall success in life, both personally and professionally. So we know that there's a huge difference in the behaviors that people exhibit based on their level of EQ, whether it's high or low. So here are some characteristics of people who have high levels of emotional intelligence. Now that doesn't mean that all of the time, if it's high, they exhibit this, and all the time if it's low, they exhibit that. But it means that most of the time, people with high levels of EQ are satisfied, aware, balanced, peaceful, have high appropriate optimum self-esteem, and are happy. They're living in joy. Whereas people who tend to have low EQ are frustrated, They're unaware. They don't see how they're contributing to the problem. They're often restless and unstable. They sometimes have either really low levels of self-worth or overinflated. You know, they think everybody else is better than I am, or they think, boy, I'm better than everybody else. And they're rarely living at joy. They can be unhappy, even depressed. So those with high levels of EQ are motivated. They're content. That doesn't mean they're not striving to improve, but they're content with where they are right now. They're connected with others. They're calm. They're interdependent. They're not dependent or independent. They want to do what they can do, but they're certainly willing to have people help them do things that they can't do. Usually lots of energy. And they perceive success. They see themselves, they picture themselves successful. Compared to those with low EQ, they're dejected, they're often angry, lonely, stressed more than others. They try to be independent, but they're really dependent, tired, and they picture failure, not success. That's huge. I had a young person come to my office who said, I just can't find a decent partner. Nobody out there meets my needs. I said, really? Yes, I look everywhere. I said, well, if I were you, I'd take another look at that. And the person said, what do you mean? I'd say, well, we're attracted to people and are attractive to other people at our level of emotional intelligence. You've heard the old saying, water seeks its own level. So does emotional intelligence. So I said, start working on your emotional intelligence, become the kind of person that you want to partner with, and then guess what? You'll find, in most all likelihood, that kind of person, because they're also looking for somebody at their level of EQ. And the response was, well, that'll take a long time. I said, it depends how much you want to work on it. I mean, a lot of this stuff is just mindset. Change your mindset. You know, identify your losses, heal them. You know, start living a joy. It doesn't take nearly as long as you think. You change your feelings by changing your thoughts. I don't know what the person did, but that's where it's at. Over the years, since Goldman put his book out, 8 behaviors have come to be associated with high levels of emotional intelligence. Now you can read, there's lots of books now on the internet. You can go to Amazon.com and look up emotional intelligence, and there's a whole bunch where there used to be one, Goldman's book. And so you can find different people analyzing this in different ways. I like the 8 behaviors personally. Some people talk about 4, but that becomes too nebulous for me. I like to deal with specifics. So I talk about 8 behaviors. Just know that there's lots of ways to define this. That doesn't mean, again, that people with high levels of EQ spend 100% of their time up here at high levels of EQ. That means that their behaviors are always giving them positive outcomes. It means that most of the time they are. And when they exhibit a behavior that doesn't give them the outcome they want, they know how to quickly course correct and change that to get a positive outcome. So I'm going to list the 8 behaviors for you, and I want you to think back to part 1, how we talked about emotions. Okay, what are the 4 core emotions? Joy, anger, fear, and sadness. Good, you got it nailed. That alone puts you light years ahead of most people on this planet. They don't have any idea about emotions. They don't know what's happening. All right, so read with me. Number 1, able to identify, accurately label, assess the level of intensity, and express emotions appropriately. Well, there you go. I was called down to a department in one of the hospitals that I was responsible for working with. When I worked with Adventist Health in Northern California, I had 3 hospitals. And I did the risk management functions, and I did compliance and several different things. I was called down to an office, and here was this person lobbing stuff at the wall. It was amazing to look at that wall. There was all kinds of stuff in there. There was a letter opener jammed in. There was a pair of scissors with one of the 2 points jabbed in. There was a stapler that had lodged partway in the wall, and this person had just picked up a laptop computer and was ready to heave it at the wall. And I said, "Stop!" And the person looked at me, and I said, "These behaviors are, congruent with someone who's very angry." "I'm not angry." A little unaware, I said, "All right, if the emotion of anger is not driving this behavior, what is?" "Well, I'm just a little frustrated." I said, "Well, frustration is a form of anger, as is hostility and bitterness, and there's hundreds of words probably." I said, what are you irritated and upset about?" And the person said, "Well, one of the people in our office said they were going to go across the campus and bring me back a cup of hot chocolate, and they're not back yet." I said, "Well, were you asking Superman to do that for you? I mean, it's a 10-minute walk across the campus to the canteen. When did they leave?" "Oh, about 5 minutes ago." Okay, totally unrealistic expectations, number one. And when, it wasn't Superman, got all upset and was exhibiting very, very dysfunctional behaviors with negative outcomes. And the bottom line was that person was relieved of the opportunity to work in that facility. Can't afford that. But what if the person did that to a patient? Individual could not understand the reason that the hospital no longer wanted to keep that relationship going. Totally unaware. And so, keep reading. Some are already throwing something or yelling before they realize the emotion of anger has surfaced, or before they realize that it's fear that surfaces or sadness. So, one of the characteristics of people with high levels of EQ is they're aware. They know who's on the stage of their brain with them. Is it joy, or did joy go off because one of the protective emotions came on? Now, this example of, redecorating the wall, to me, is a total lack of awareness. Totally ridiculous expectations. And that's not high levels of EQ. All right, number 2. Read with me. Able to recognize quickly what the emotion is designed to communicate. Some people act inappropriately in a specific situation because they didn't recognize the information the emotion was trying to convey. I have worked with women who were date raped. And it's interesting when you talk to the individuals who committed the date rape, they have a very different story. I remember one young man, he said, "Well, here, look." He said, "She was coming on to me. I mean, she was acting like she was all lovey-dovey. And so I started pressing a little bit, and then she kind of started giggling and said, 'No, don't do that. Don't do that.' She said, 'I thought she was just trying to act like she was a good girl, and if I pushed a little harder, I'd get what I want.'" Well, it's true that women tend to start giggling in romantic relationships when the other person is pushing for something they don't want. But instead of just setting their boundaries, they just giggle. That's not helping. So now we'd go back and talk to the women, and we'd say, if you are in a romantic situation and somebody's pushing and you don't want to do that, giggling and saying, I don't want to do that, is unhelpful. You use one word and a gesture. Stop. There isn't anybody on the planet, if their brain's halfway working, that doesn't get that. But then we'd talk to the women and we'd say, what made you accept a date with that person? And over and over and over again, they would tell the same story. Well, he was cute and he was kind of exciting and stuff. He says, one woman said, I agreed to go on a date, and I got in the car and I thought, I wonder if this is wise, because I'd watched him be kind of unkind and, to a couple of other women when they didn't do what he wanted them to do. And I'm going, you didn't pay attention to your gut. An emotion was surfacing telling you this might not be a good choice for you, and you completely overrode that. So they didn't recognize the emotion, get the information from it that might have saved them from a date rape. We do that at different levels in life about different things. So high EQ is you recognize the changes in your body, you identify the emotion, and you make a choice. So one of them said to me, well, what could I have done? I'm already in the car. I said, any number of things. You could tell him to stop and get out. When they pulled up at a signal light that was red, get out. Use your cell phone. Call somebody. Tell them where you are. There's lots of things you can do. But don't just sit there when intuition tells you that there's something not right about this. Number 3, read with me. Able to articulate the difference between identifying a specific emotion and taking immediate action based on that emotion. Sometimes the preferred decision is to learn from this experience and exhibit a more functional behavior next time. Meaning, there have been at times at family gatherings when one of my relatives arrived spifflicated. That was our Canadian word for having had slightly too much alcohol. And when she was in that case, she was just as funny as a broken crutch. But what she'd say was not necessarily kind or appropriate. So, we're not going to boot her out of the family. But there were times when, based on her behavior, we learned from that experience, and we didn't invite her to some specific family gatherings because we knew she'd show up spifflicated. So there's sometimes when you're in a situation and you're putting things together and I don't like this. I'm not in any danger right now, but that's the last time I'm going to come to this type of gathering. So it's knowing when to implement what you've learned and when you just wait, and next time you'll make a different decision. Now, so are you seeing that the first 3 already just relate to how you deal with all the emotions we talked about last time? It's how you apply them, what you learn from them. Number 4, read. Able to listen, read and interpret social cues, and understand the perspective of others, whether or not there is agreement. Each brain is unique and only has its own opinion. You can agree, disagree, or negotiate to common ground, or walk away. So emotional intelligence is not about agreeing. Emotional intelligence is about knowing what you believe and what your boundaries are, being willing to listen to someone else's perspective. Sometimes I change mine based on new information I get. That's the whole point of learning. But it's not about you have to agree. I often disagree with somebody and I'm not going to say a word. I mean, what good would it do? If you think that there's probably no reasonable probability that you talking about it is going to change their position, I'd just say thank you for your opinion and go on. Occasionally I will say, you know, I have a different opinion based on research that came out last month or something like that. If we have to come to one opinion, I know how to negotiate that. But it's not about agreeing. And sometimes people think, oh, well, emotional intelligence is I just say yes to everything. That couldn't be farther from the truth. Number 5. Exhibit effective verbal and nonverbal skills along with empathy and compassion. Parents sometimes enable dysfunctional behaviors. You can exhibit empathy and compassion and still get the job done. The places that I notice this are when parents allow their children to watch hours of television every day unsupervised. The current research suggests that up to an hour of television, of good programming, is probably better than either watching none or watching more than an hour a day. But it means monitoring. What are they watching? And sometimes parents don't do a good job with that. You know, it's a school night and they want to stay up till midnight and watch something or other. And the parents go, well, you know, you'll probably do better at school today if you went to bed at 10, but oh, all right. And now the rest of the whole week is a bust because they lost sleep. That's enabling dysfunctional behaviors. You know, you got to set what's going to happen in your home realistically. So I'm concerned about, you know, I'm not saying that you should have a television, but I am concerned about families that are so rigid that when the kids leave the family, now they do all the things that their family didn't allow them to do. And it's much better to do a little bit of good programming than to totally say you can't do any of this, because in the youth authority, where we dealt with adolescents who were exhibiting egregious behaviors, we did experiment after experiment. You take the kids that were exhibiting the most egregious behaviors so they wouldn't be in jail for youth. And then, after you had identified them, you'd look at their records. And this is what we found. Kids from homes where there was no structure, often where there were a lot of addictive behaviors, exhibited the same kind of behaviors as did the youth who came from excessively rigid, highly religious homes. Same behaviors, just different ends of the spectrum. So we know the brain works best in balance. And it's easier to be laissez-faire or too religious often for people than to look for that middle healthy zone and help their children grow up with that. Number 6, able to manage own feelings and moods effectively and take responsibility for them. A mood is simply a feeling that hangs around for a time, sometimes for a very long time. Have you ever heard people say, you made me feel bad? Nobody can make you feel bad. Nobody. They can do a behavior. They can say something. You choose if you're going to get all moody and depressed because of what they said. It's just so empowering to know that you are not at the whim of anybody else on the planet. You choose. You know, back to this empathy and compassion. I remember being in one of my hospitals and walking down the corridor on a med-surg unit. And here I saw this sweet young thing coming out of a room in a student nurse uniform. She had a tray, and on the tray was a loaded syringe with about 3 inches of white stuff in the barrel. And I thought, well, that's interesting. She's coming out of the room that way. I wonder if the person wasn't in the room. I wonder if, when she went in, she found out it was the wrong patient. She's looking for another patient. And she was just sort of standing there in the hall. So I walked up to her and I introduced myself. And I said, I noticed she came out of the room with the full syringe. I says, what is that, penicillin? Yeah, she says, it is. It's 3 million units. I said, well, tell me the reason you're coming out. Well, she says, I walked in. I got this penicillin shot to give to this guy. He was really cute. Well, what is she, 18? And I said, and? Well, she says, I walked in and I said, I have your penicillin shot. And he pulled the sheets right up to his chin and said, I don't want to take that. And she said, so I said, okay. And I came out. Now she says, I don't know what to do with this. I said, you got to get the job done. Let me go back in here and talk to this guy with you. So we go back in, and yeah, if his face was any indication, he probably was pretty much of a hunk. And he's lying there, with the sheet up like this. And I said, introduced myself, and I said, tell me what you're in the hospital for. Well, he says, I got a really bad case of gonorrhea, the clap, I said, oh, that's too bad. Yeah, he says, it is my 3rd case this year. I said, well, the doctor's ordered 3 million units of penicillin. Do we need to have a conversation first of how you get clap? Do you know how you get this? He goes, yeah, I know. I said, well, this is really not a good situation. I said, you keep getting episodes of gonorrhea, you're going to get a lot of scar tissue, and then the probable behavior that got you the gonorrhea, you might not even be able to engage in that behavior anymore. He looks at me and he says, I know. It's like the guy who just had open heart surgery and asks for a cigarette in the recovery room. I said, so what's it going to be, pal? You want the penicillin or don't you? Because it's no skin off my nose either way. And he goes, well, I probably ought to take it. I said, all right, roll over. So he rolls over and you see a piece of his posterior. I found out later that was that student nurse's first penicillin injection on a real patient. She'd only done it on a grapefruit before. He says, it's going to hurt. I says, it's not going to hurt nearly as much as if you don't get this cleaned up. Okay. I watched her and cringed. So here's his butt. Here's this long needle with 3 million units. She looks at it. She goes, I'm standing there just cringing. If she wanted it to make him pay, she couldn't have picked anything better. He goes, ow, that really hurt. And I thought, yeah, I bet it did. I said, well, you know how to avoid another one, don't you? Yeah. But who knows what he did? She was exhibiting compassion. It's going to hurt, but she was not getting the job done. And that's the struggle for parents. Getting the job done and still being compassionate. Number 7, able to handle relationships effectively, minimizing any tendency to take things personally, jump to conclusions, or overreact. Those are 3 really commonly observed behaviors in people with low EQ. So when's the last time you did one of those 3? I call it JOT. When's the last time you jumped to conclusions? When's the last time you overreacted? When's the last time you took something personally? Stop it. Low EQ, going to give you negative outcomes. Just replay the DVD in your mind of the last time you did one of those. Back it up. See yourself exhibiting functional behavior, and pretty soon you'll catch yourself before you do it. It's just amazing how quickly it goes once you make your mind up. And the last one, able to delay gratification and exhibit good impulse control. How do you do that? Hopefully it's efficiently. But like the guy in the hospital, he obviously hadn't exhibited good impulse control. Third time he's in the hospital with a flaming case of gonorrhea in 1 year. He's getting negative outcomes over and over again just because of choice. Now, there's been some fabulous studies done about the ability to delay gratification. I want to talk briefly about the Stanford marshmallow experiment, because there's been some new follow-up to that, and it's critical to learn this skill if you want to be successful. So Walter Mischel was a Stanford University professor, and in 1961 he was already doing research studies on children. And he found, for example, that children with absent fathers, no father in the home or intermittently, often prefer immediate, lesser rewards over delayed, more valuable rewards, which is fascinating. 64, he did another study, and he found that children's willingness to wait, defer gratification, is negatively impacted by uncertainty about the future, the uncertainty about the likelihood, the value, or the temporal availability of the future reward, meaning, is it really going to happen? You know, if I don't think it's going to really happen, maybe I don't want to wait, maybe I'll just settle for this lesser reward. Mid-1970s, Walter designed one of the largest longitudinal studies that's ever been done. He wanted to evaluate the link, if any, between a child's ability to defer gratification and what their long-term success was. So he started out 653 4- to 6-year-olds, and you can go to YouTube, I mean right now, I mean not this minute, but today, and you can type in Stanford Marshmallow Experiment. You can actually watch little clips of them doing these experiments with the children, and they're fascinating. And in a nutshell, Walter promised these children, I'm going to give you a marshmallow. You don't have to do anything to get it. But here's the deal. If you wait to eat that marshmallow till I come back to the room in about 15 minutes, I'll give you 2. Instead of 1, you'll have 2. Now, it doesn't matter what you do. I don't mind. You know, you can eat it right now if you want to, but if you wait, you'll get 2. And then they had graduate students looking through the one-way glass and videotaping every move of every kid and so on. Some of those little kids had that marshmallow about crammed in their mouth before Walter left the room. No wait whatsoever. Some waited, often somewhere around 5 or 6 minutes, but it was really, really hard and they couldn't do it. You know, one of my favorite little clips was of this little freckle-faced, red-haired kid, you know, hair standing up at all angles, and here was his marshmallow right in front of him. He's looking at that, almost in his mouth. He goes, oh. No. Well, did he wait? Of course he didn't wait. It's almost in his mouth. Finally, he just shoved it in. Some who ate their marshmallow before the 15 minutes started going around to other children who had not yet eaten their marshmallow and exhibited bullying behaviors, trying to get their marshmallow away from that kid so they could have a second one right now. And that was the beginning of our starting to understand that bullying behaviors are learned, period. So when a kid or an adult is exhibiting bullying behaviors, the question becomes, where did they learn that? Because it's learned behavior. Some of the children seem to think differently. And Walter apparently said later that if he'd known more about this, but he couldn't because it had never been done before, he'd have tried to do a little bit more background studying about where the kids came from in terms of their family system, if he could have done that, because he'd like to know what the family home life was like, because that probably played into the ones who could wait. And then we're going to go back and look at the ones who waited. Were they more toward the 6-year-olds or what? Because, you know, the reality principle develops somewhere around age 5, something like that. But some of these kids were different. There was one little boy, he was so cute, went over in the corner, put his marshmallow down right beside him, and went sound asleep. Walter comes back to the room, he hops up, here's my marshmallow, where's my other one? There were some who got together and started singing songs, anything to distract themselves. There was a little girl who said, come on over here, gather around me, put your marshmallow behind your back. Duh. Out of sight is sort of out of mind. And I'm going to tell you stories. We're getting a marshmallow. There were some little boys who, of course, need to move to learn, and they decided to create an army. So you'd see them, hop, 1, 2, walking around the room with their marshmallow. So when all was said and done, nearly 1/3 of those children waited the amount of time and got a second marshmallow. So 200 and some. 2/3 ate their marshmallow before the researcher came back to the room. So they didn't get a second marshmallow. So that's about almost 1/3 of the kids. And when they had done this part of the study, this was their conclusion. Read with me. The quality of self-control, defined as the capacity to defer gratification as one single skill, is twice as powerful a predictor of later success in life as IQ. And then with additional research, the researchers have come up with EQs worth about 80%. Now, 14 years later, 1988, they did the first big evaluation of those original participants to see what their lives were like. You know, were they successful? Were they not successful? What was going on? And they found the participants who had not waited were already much less successful and were more indecisive, stressed, and stubborn. They found that those who had won a second marshmallow, didn't matter how they did it, fall asleep, sing, you know, tell stories, whatever. They were more socially competent and self-assertive. They exhibited more resilience in dealing with life's frustration and had applied the ability to delay gratification in the pursuit of their goals, meaning that many of them were in track and field and very successful. Many of them were in musical groups and very successful. How many of you have taken music lessons? Yeah, well, good. The rest of you start them tomorrow. They're very good for your brain. But to be successful in music, you do need to practice. And that requires you to delay gratification, because sometimes you feel like doing something else, but it's practice time. And so they were already applying that ability to defer gratification to a long-term goal. 2 years later, they went and analyzed all of these kids and what kind of scores did they get on their SATs. Now, I don't know if you have SATs in Australia, but you probably got an equivalent. You know, it's the exam you take if you want to get into college, and your score determines a whole lot of things. So they found the SAT then had a possible score of 2,400 points. Average was about 1,500 to 1,600. Above average scores improve one's chance of getting into a more selective or preferred school and of getting grants rather than loans. And they found that these kids who'd gotten the second marshmallow averaged 200 points higher on their SATs. Put them in a whole different strata as far as getting into college. They were also much less likely to be involved in substance abuse. People who are involved in substance abuse want to feel good right now. Don't want to work through the problems, just feel good. And they don't want to wait. Inability to defer gratification. So, now go to 2011. We now had brain scanning equipment. So they brain scanned a sample group of these kids who were in the original experiment. Some who got a second marshmallow and some who did not. They found key differences in two brain areas between the participants with high delay times, meaning they could wait and get a second marshmallow, versus those that couldn't wait, low delay times. Two parts of the brain were more active. Prefrontal cortex, the part that clearly distinguishes us as human. They found it was far more active in the participants who'd gotten the second marshmallow. And that part of the brain is where we plan, evaluate, decide, set goals, choose, activate willpower. They found that a piece in this middle layer, the ventral striatum, it has everything to do with learning by association. What does that mean? It means that if I go get drunk and drive and get, in trouble, that's associated with an accident or a ticket or something that I really don't want. It's all about what you do is the consequences for what you do. I was working in the addictive health program. There was a young man who came in because the court sent him there. He was 17, second DUI, and the judge said to him, "Young man, you're 17. You've had your license less than a year. This is your second DUI. You show up in my court again with a third DUI, I'm pulling your license for 3 years. Do you understand?" He was back in court in 11 days with his third DUI. No association learning had taken place. The judge said to him, "You were here 11 days ago and I told you, you show up in my court again with another DUI, you lose your license for 3 years. What's the problem?" "I don't know." "Do you remember me telling you this?" "I'm not sure." No compos mentis here, folks. This part of the brain, and of course all addictions, this part of the brain was much more active in the participants who got a second marshmallow when they were trying to control their responses to alluring temptations, meaning, you know what? If you don't practice this week, you could go to Disneyland. I know you got a recital coming up next week, but hey, Disneyland would be really great. And that part of the brain just lights up as they try to decide, are they going to delay gratification for the better result at their rehearsal, or are they going to just throw it all in the basket and go to Disneyland? So there's a little bit about emotional intelligence. I think it's fascinating. I didn't learn anything about that growing up, nothing. My parents didn't know anything about it, neither did their grandparents or theirs or theirs or theirs. But as we began to get this information, and I especially looked at those 3 key characteristics of people with low EQ: jumping to conclusions, overreacting, and taking things personally, I decided I had work to do. And it's amazing how quickly it goes. And it's amazing You know, I mentioned yesterday, researchers believe half of all the problems we have in life are of our own making because of the way we think. So you change the way you think, you increase your level of emotional intelligence, and you just drop half your problems off the back of your pickup. And half the problems to deal with really makes you feel like you hardly have any to deal with. So I am loving what we're learning about emotional intelligence. I consider it's a required course for success, because emotional intelligence is estimated to be what % of our success in life? 80. So if you want to be more successful, you know what to work on. You know, I work on raising my IQ. I haven't had an IQ test for a while, but you know, I do things that are known to help. I'll get some of those SAT exams and work through those and see if I can beat the number that I got last time. But I mostly work on my emotional intelligence. And it's been really, really helpful to me as a lecturer because, you know, you lecture to 2,000 people, somebody isn't going to like what you said. You know, they came with a chip on your shoulder. It wouldn't matter what you said, they wouldn't like it. And they'll sometimes come up and tell me, you know, this was a total waste of time. And I'll say, I regret that. Nothing to do with me. You know, low EQ, you'd think, oh dear, did I not do a good job? You know, I should be able to make everybody happy. Well, get a life. You know, you can be exhibiting wonderful behaviors and someone can choose to jump to conclusions, overreact, or take something personally. But it makes it possible for many of us to do what we do because we're not derailed by what other people think or say. But it's challenging. You know, the way I put it is there's always a next class. Something comes up you haven't dealt with before. Now you need to learn how to apply emotional intelligence to that. Homework's challenging. Go home and think about it, decide, analyze your behavior, decide what you need to do next time to have better outcomes. Exams are tough to pass. Some people give up. I'm here to tell you, avoid giving up. Every time I raise my EQ, even by a little bit, it pays huge dividends. It's worth the work. So the more you raise your EQ, it's not just good for you. You know, our kids watch us all the time, even if they're grown. And I was not able to role model for them high levels of EQ across the board. There were some things I did very well. There was others I didn't do very well because I didn't know any better. But I watched them watching me as I get more functional, as I learn to hone my EQ, and then I see them doing that with their children. What I would have liked to do for them had I known, I see them now doing for their children. And it's all about role modeling. So it is never too late to start. And I love this information. It's changed my life. So I encourage you to study it and work on it and evaluate your behaviors and raise your EQ. As the years go by, you'll be so glad you did. And so will everybody else who knows you. Thank you very much.